Welcome back to our series, AWS Cognito and Go. So in the last video, we added automatic verification to all users that sign up. We also talked about two methods for verification that you could use. One of them was email verification, and the second one was just verification through the SDK, and we went with that second option. So today we're going to finally start signing in. So we've been able to create users and verify the users. Now we're going to sign in and get tokens back. So we're going to add a new endpoint into our API for signing in. And we'll talk about how the authentication flow works in Cognito for user pools. And we'll talk about two ways that your applications can handle the auth flow. And those are client side and server side. And we'll walk through both those today. All right, so the first authentication flow is called client-side authentication flow. So this is a nice diagram, and we'll kind of talk through this. So you have like your mobile client or your web client, and you would have specific SDKs for those, right? There's a AWS SDK for JavaScript, one for Android, iOS, etc. So for example, if you're building out like a React app in the front end, you could use just that client-side SDK. You wouldn't need any sort of backend service like we're building in Go today, and you would basically handle authentication entirely in the browser. You would never need a backend service to call. So you would initiate your auth. There's actually a function in the SDK called initiate auth here, and you would send over the username and the password to Cognito. And then this middle section here, Cognito is pretty customizable. You can have custom challenges. Maybe you have to verify with a code through SMS or through email, etc. So you can have a bunch of these challenges in between. And eventually, when the user passes through all of those challenges, you receive back your tokens from Cognito. So that's one way of doing it. That's the client-side way of doing it. But today we're doing server-side authentication flow. And there could be many reasons for doing this. I'm sure you have a good reason for wanting to do server-side auth flow. Maybe you just want more control. You don't want to have your authentication live purely on the client side. You just want to have maybe some custom authentication flow or some custom logic somewhere in between. So that's where server-side comes in. And instead of using the initiate auth, you can use the admin initiate auth function that is in the SDK, and it just requires some extra credentials that we have. Remember, we created that IAM user so that we have SDK access in our Go service. And similarly, if there are any challenges in between, you can still have those and you can still respond to them. And at the end of the day, you'll still get tokens back. So one thing we will need to do is change a setting in our user pool here. So you see this last bullet point, enable sign-in API for server-based authentication. So we need to go back and change our app client to allow that. So I'll walk you through that right now. So I'm just in our user pool here. Our demo user pool, and you can just jump to app clients. And if you've already made it, that's fine, no worries. You can just click show details. This is basically the edit screen. So what we want here, I believe, is this allow admin user password auth. Let's just double check. And we can just check that right there. That's what we're looking for. And this just enables username and password auth for admin APIs for our authentication. We're good there, and we can just hit save. And we're all set. All right, so let's talk about the server-side authentication flow, which uses these admin endpoints. So one of the things you'll see a few places in the documentation is just this acronym SRP. I didn't find a good explanation of it in these documentations. I didn't really find a good explanation of what it means, so I just wanted to touch on that really briefly for anyone coming in. SRP means Secure Remote Protocol Password. It's a protocol. I won't go into the details of that protocol, but essentially what it does, so say you have some web app like a React app or something like that, user signs in, right? So they've given you a username and a password, and we don't really want to send a plain text username and a password over the network. So what you can do and what is built in to these front end these client-side SDKs here is this SRP. So basically, you never actually send the plain text username or password over the network to Cognito. So it's kind of a little bit more secure in case there's any kind of man-in-the-middle attack going on. So right here, so for our admin authentication flow, we're not going to be using SRP. If you want to, you can set it up with SRP. There's a way to do it, but we're not going to cover that in today's video. So they say there's an alternative set of admin API operations designed for use on secure backend servers if you want to avoid the SRP calculations. So the assumption we're going with today is we have a very safe and secure backend server. Um, and so we are not going to use SRP. All right, so this is the request we're going to end up building out in the Go SDK. So we'll specify the auth flow we're going to use. We'll pass the username and password, and just like before, I think for the verify request that we had to make, we'll need the client ID and also the user pool ID. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look in the Cognito identity provider package, and let's find the function that we'll call. All right, so we're in the documentation now for the Cognito identity provider package, and we found our admin initiate auth function. So this action might generate an SMS text message. So that's kind of the custom auth flows going on. We're not going to have any text messages or any challenges generated. It'll just be a straightforward pass through the inputs, and hopefully the sign-in succeeds and we get back our output. So let's take a look at what we need for our input here. And so we have this. This is optional analytics metadata. So we need to specify the auth flow type and the parameters, the client ID, and where is it? The user pool ID. So those are the things we need to specify, and pretty much just what's here in this example request. So let's go ahead and jump into the code and let's start working on this. All right, so we're back in our project, and the first thing we want to do is add a sign in endpoint. So just like we have a sign up, now we need to sign in. So let's do an R post, and we'll give it our pattern, and we'll give it the function sign in. So sign in doesn't exist, so let's go ahead and copy these over. Copy this over here. We'll change this to sign in. That clears up the error. All right, so we'll need a request type, sign in request. It's a struct, and we'll just take a username and a password. I'll just take this from here. Okay, and we'll need some kind of sign in response struct as well. This struct is gonna return all the tokens we get, probably the expiration as well, but we'll get there a little bit later. And just like we did in sign up, we need to parse the request, handle any errors, and then get the client, the Cognito client, from the request context. And remember, we have that awesome middleware that just injects the context in for us. Let's paste these in. We need to change this over to a sign-in request. All right, and the Cognito client, cool. And let's just do something early here. Let's make a response, sign in response, leave it empty, and let's just return it. So we can do JSON.new encoder, give it where we want to write to, and then we can just say encode response. Okay, that returns an error. I don't really care about the error, so we'll just use that empty placeholder. All right, so now we need to actually use our Cognito client here. So what are we doing? We're going to be making that admin initiate auth, and that takes context and our input. The context we'll just get from the incoming request, and our input, we need a sign in input. So let's make that sign in input, and it is a admin initiate auth input. Let's fill all the fields, and let's take a look at what we're working with here. So we don't need analytics. We need our auth parameters. We don't need client metadata. We don't need context. Okay, so client ID um, is just our app client ID. We need the AWS strings, and we get our user pool just from our Cognito client. So auth parameters is a map of strings, two strings, so we can do that now. Yep, we'll leave that blank. Our auth flow, let's figure out what that needs to be. So auth flow is admin user password auth, paste that in. And the two keys we need are username and password. They're all caps. So let's remember that are all caps and let's make those. Username we'll get from our request, and password we will also get from our request. Okay, there's our input. There's the actual request being made, and it returns admin initiate auth output and an error. So let's get those. Output comma error. Let's handle the error. Just gonna paste this down. And we have an error, so we can just say error.error, and we'll say bad request. Okay, otherwise we have our output, and let's see what that output is. Let's hop in here, go to the output, and let's see. So we have authentication results. This is only returned if the caller does not need to pass another challenge. We don't have any challenges, so that looks good. Let's see if we need anything else from here. Challenge name, nope. Cool. So we just basically want this authentication result from here, and let's open this up. So this is what we're looking for. This has all of our tokens, um, access token, ID token. We'll talk about the differences between these. The expiration date, all of our tokens have expiration dates, and this refresh token, which we use to keep the token alive, token type as well. So while we're here, let's take all of these, copy that, jump back into our main. This is what we want to return in the sign-in response. So let's paste those in. New device metadata, we don't care about that. Don't need that. So let's just go ahead and set these all up. Okay. All right, so there's our response, and let's fill up this response now. So let's go ahead and fill all fields, and now we can just pull them out from the output. So we can say output dot authentication result, and then just bring these in. Yep. I'm just going to go through and type these out. All right, and we're back. Okay, so this looks good. We've got a response. We are sending our response. Let's just take a quick look through. Awesome. So let's start this up. Docker compose up, pass the build in. And I have already created dev2 in our user pool. So I'm going to just sign in with this. Let's wait for us to be running. So it'll be curl. Yep, there it is. And the endpoint is signed in now. And we're passing in that body with the username and the password. So we should be up and running. So let's run it. And I'm going to pass this to JQ so that it just formats it. All right, so there we go. We get our response back, and it looks like we have everything. We've got a token from Cognito. We have our ID token, our refresh token. We get the token type, and we see expires in as well. So that worked. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about access token and ID token now. And let's hop in here. This is just jwt.io. This is a nifty website for kind of debugging and decoding tokens. So let's look at it. Pasted it in, and we see on the right here, here's a bunch of information. We see the token use ID, so that's showing that it's the ID token. We see when it was authenticated at, we see the expiry in here, issued at, etc. So the main thing with the identification tokens is that these tokens, the ID tokens, contain all of the attributes that you set up for your user pool. For our user pool, we only have username. So remember, if we jump back to our user pool here, under attributes, you can have all of these things, right? You can have name, email, nickname, whatever. You can make them required, etc. So any of these attributes that you have set up, that you've created a user with, they will be present in this ID token. So basically, the ID token can have more potential to have like a PII, like personal identifying information. So an ID token you want to be a little bit more careful with versus an access token. An access token, which has only the bare minimum data to still be useful in authentication. So here we just have the username, and it doesn't matter which attributes we have enabled here. They'll never show up in the access token. So for example, if you have some kind of system set up, like a distributed system, and you have a bunch of microservices, and you need to be running this token through each of those services, maybe service A calls service B, calls service C, and so you need to pass some token through, down all the way through, so that all of those services know this request is authenticated. You would probably want to use an access token here. If, on the other hand, you needed some specific attribute here. Maybe you have a custom attribute for your user, or you need to pass the email through. You probably could get away with using your identification token. Yeah, and some services, some AWS services as well, pretty good thing to note, require the identification token to be used. So if you have like some integration with some service out there, you might need to use the ID token, but you can look that up on your own and you can determine your needs and use cases on your own there. All right, so we have our access token, our ID token, and our refresh token here. Let's talk a little bit about the refresh token and how that works. So the refresh token is used to regenerate your ID token and your access token if they've expired. So let's look at the documentation on it. Cognito using the refresh token. So you can use the refresh token to retrieve new ID and access tokens. By default, that refresh token would expire 30 days after a user signs in. And to use it, basically, let's see, where is their example here? Yep, right here. So to use the refresh token to get new ID and access tokens with the user pool API, you can use that same admin initiate auth that we did, but instead of passing, what did we pass here? Instead of passing admin user password auth, you would use the refresh token. So your app, probably you would send back your tokens to the front end, your React app or whatever you're building, and maybe you store that refresh token somewhere. And if your user's ID or access tokens expire, you just use that as kind of a fail safe to retrieve them. You can also revoke refresh tokens. So probably an important thing to do for your app is have a sign out endpoint and make sure that you hit this, you call this admin user global signout function, which revokes all of these tokens. So that's an important flow as well. All right, so we have covered the sign up API endpoint and a lot of the authentication flow. So that kind of wraps it up for this video. Hope this was valuable to you. In the next video in this series, we'll talk about kind of the final point of this authentication flow, and that's verifying web tokens. So once you sign in and you generate the tokens, you send them back to your application. Now your application is out there in the wild, and it's going to start using it to talk to your services. So the last stage will be verifying those tokens. So we'll set up another endpoint in our API, probably /verify, that takes in a token and it just checks and makes sure that it is a valid Cognito token. So yeah, again, thanks for watching. Hope you're able to take something valuable away from this video and this series in general. Please make sure to leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out, lets me know that you're finding value in these videos, and kind of motivates me to keep going. So I really appreciate you all tuning in, and I will see you in the next video.